Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at Demong Hunter for the Nintendo Switch. And as unique as the title Demong Hunter is, it's actually a fairly unique game, and I can safely say I don't think I've ever played anything exactly like it. And diving into the story, from what I can tell, Demong Hunter is based on the scenario that in some computer simulation program, an AI has corrupted, and this is the bug that you're trying to fight, and is throwing a wrench in the works for all the VR AI kind of stuff, and you have to go in and squash that little bug. But actually, as I started thinking about it, it's not really that unique a scenario if you've ever watched cartoons in the 90s. I mean, there's a lot of things about heroes using an avatar to dive in to crush a virus-laden AI. I mean, you've got Reboot, Code Lyoko, Digimon. But before we jump into any more things that could possibly border on critiques, gameplay. Demong Hunter is essentially an arena-style combat game, though it does blend in really big elements of action and RPG. The entire game is divided up over 8 levels. Some of these are subdivided and have both bosses and sub-bosses, but no matter how they're divided up, each one plays essentially the same. Looking at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you've got your skills with cooldowns, very reminiscent of an MMORPG. And of course, slaying any enemies is gonna get you some gold. Using this gold outside of a level, you can purchase upgrades to any one of your skill attributes, such as your attack, your defense, your agility, or even the effect damage of your skills. And so while this isn't strictly a roguelike style of game, because you do have to constantly reinvest in your character, you can expect to die pretty often. Because the skill and stat scaling of the game makes sure that it's absolutely impossible to actually play it all through in one pass. Though even if you don't have your skills pushed out maybe as far as they should be for that level, on rare occasion you do get a few cool drops. Besides gold, every once in a while you might get a drop for a certain upgrade to increase your weapon's stats, or get some sort of blitz mode that temporarily boosts all of your character's skills. Though, as I mentioned briefly, this is rare, so don't bank on it. It's going to be far more advantageous to start memorizing the enemy's skill patterns, because the later you get into the game, the harder these swarms become to manage. Besides paying attention to the enemy's attacks, though, you'll also have to pay attention to a little script on the right side of the screen. In every single level, the waves will come at you, but each wave will have certain objectives. And while early in gameplay it might have you just be defeating every character on screen, the later you get into it, it might have you defeat a certain number of a certain type of creature. At the end of each of the 8 level segments, though, there is a gigantic boss with huge amounts of health. And not only that, they do insane amounts of damage if you accidentally get hit. But clearing out each of these bosses grants you access to an artifact that permanently boosts your skill stats in a certain area. And whether this is increasing your rate of fire or increasing your damage, whatever artifacts you manage to collect actually affect all of the different avatars you can possibly play as. But each of these artifacts has kind of a 1 through 3 stars marking, and that does affect how effective it is. And so as I learned from playing through it, after you beat an area, it's good to go back and try and re-earn that artifact, because you might get a more powerful version. But it's only after beating the game that the real game really opens up. If you noticed looking at the map, the trail goes across the screen and pops off to the other side. And this is because after beating the game, the real challenge of the game for the true ending opens up. And this grants you access to an entirely new map with some entirely overpowered characters to fight against. Thankfully though, beating the game gets you access to Freya, the new unlockable character, which has a ridiculous attack stat. But as large of a chunk of information that whole first section of the review was, it's time to get into the video and the audio. The visuals in Demong Hunter honestly are pretty darn good. They're cute, they're chibi versions, and all of the animations and the scenarios and scenes are done really, really well. And the audio for the game is honestly up to that same level of polish, so the video and the audio are probably going to be one of its bigger draws. And being that Demong Hunter has a fairly distinct mobile feel to it, I really didn't expect that level of polish in the effects. But that being said, Demong Hunter isn't without its flaws, and maybe watching the review to this point you've already picked out a couple for yourself. First off, Demong Hunter, unlike what it looks like, or what it could be based on its story and its scenario, is a pure arena-style combat game. And so despite the RPG elements, the real-time combat and skill cooldowns, the unlockable characters, the unlockable real ending for the game, you really won't get anything more from the game than arena-style combat. But the next critique is how the game progresses. As I mentioned briefly, the RPG element of the game is almost more like a roguelike element, meaning you have to get as far as you can, die, buff yourself, get as far as you can, die, buff yourself, lather, rinse, repeat. And so again, genre-wise, if you're not a fan of that type of skill progression, if you're not a fan of that type of game, and you hear RPG elements and you think huge intrinsic investment in your character, well, that's definitely not what you're going to be getting. The RPG elements are specifically referring to the fact that you can level up specific skills by choice. But other than that, and partially going back to the visuals, because there is something to note there, would have to be the forced perspective of the game. You're playing in a very small arena with sometimes very large enemies. And unfortunately, you can't zoom out, pan, or even rotate the camera at all. Which means that in certain circumstances, especially with the giant king slime toward the end of the game, sometimes you just won't be able to see them. And so forming a game that relies massively on the ability to predict enemy attack patterns and then being able to hide the enemies due to the forced perspective, well, it can get a little bit frustrating. But taking a step back and looking at Demong Hunter as a whole, it really does have stellar graphics and stellar audio, and if you're a fan of arena clear style combat and you do enjoy roguelike elements, it really can be a pretty fun time. Though if you are a hardcore arena clear style gamer, you might prefer to be assaulted by skeletal minions and zombies other than squishy little candies and pieces of cake. But considering that the entire game really does open up to offer quite a few hours of gameplay, considering the true ending adding an additional 8 levels with even more powerful enemies, considering the sale price of just a couple dollars, it really does offer a lot of game. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of Demong Hunter now on the Nintendo Switch, so if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw us a like or a comment to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. There are new and unique indie games coming out literally every single day. And just a quick look at the eShop shows you that there are thousands of them out there, so whether it's an easy hard pass or an absolutely unforgettable gem, chances are if it's on the Switch, you're going to find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been The Budget Gamer, so as always, thanks for watching.